Okay, so let's just have a few quick examples of simple statements. So 3 is on the real number line, is 1, and today is Thursday. So just simple statements like the ones we saw before there. Then there are negation statements. So 3i is not on the real number line because it is an imaginary number. And today is not Thursday. These are both negation statements. And so the note there says negations are for taking the negative meaning of any simple statement. Fairly self-explanatory. So now how about some conjunction statements? Alan is here and Beverly is here. Or possibly Alan is here but Carl is not here. So the but form of the conjunction joins statements of different meanings, but it's not only for use with negations. Let's see, for example, Alan is here but Carl is there. And we could also say Carl is there and Beverly is here. So and but are not completely interchangeable, but we can use them in similar ways in different situations. And here we can see how normal everyday language is not always logically rigorous. In other words, it's not always going to have exactly the same meaning in every circumstance. So now we come to the inclusive and exclusive disjunctions, and here we can see again the problems that everyday language can cause. For example, either I will eat Italian or I will eat Thai. Now in principle there is nothing that prevents me from eating both Italian and Thai, but usually when you have a meal, which is what is often meant by naming a certain kind of food, it means you're probably not going to need to eat another meal, at least not immediately. And this is kind of supported by the either word at the beginning. If we take that away and just say, I will eat Italian or I will eat Thai, then it becomes even more unclear whether I mean one or the other or both. Having either at the beginning does strongly suggest that we're talking about the exclusive form of the disjunction, but it doesn't make it absolutely clear. On the other hand, if I say either I will run home or I will take a bus, that's pretty clear. If I'm going to go home by bus, then I'm not going to run. If I'm going to run home, then I won't be taking a bus. So in this case, the either or form does seem to pretty clearly state that we're talking about an exclusive disjunction. Now we come to the conditional, and as we said, it is if then. So if you study hard, then you will get a good grade. Or how about if you eat a bucket of ice cream, then you will be sick. And you'll notice I haven't actually included the word then. It is implied in the second statement. If you eat a bucket of ice cream, you will be sick. We can clearly see where then would fit into that grammatical structure. So the conditional gives two pieces of information, two simple statements, a possible outcome, and a condition that outcome depends on. And we'll talk about some other vocabulary for talking about conditions in a moment. So conditions are a little bit like logical switches. They give us a possible outcome, and that outcome either does or does not happen based on something else. They often use an if-then format, but not always. For example, if we look at these two sentences, what are the if-then forms of these conditionals? When I'm hungry, I eat something, and that's fairly straightforward. We can just say, if I am hungry, then I will eat something. The second example is a little more complex. I will be early as long as I get the next SkyTrain. So as long as is a grammatical structure which actually puts the condition at the end. So what we really are basing our conclusion on here is if I get the next SkyTrain or not. So to put this in if-then form, we would say if I get the next SkyTrain, then I will be early. So another word for the condition in this case is the antecedent, and another word for the outcome is the consequent. So the antecedent is the if part of the conditional, and the consequent is the then part of the conditional. But of course, in an example like the second one, the antecedent is grammatically at the end of the sentence, and the consequent is grammatically at the beginning. So let's just have a look at some examples of biconditional statements, although we haven't really yet explored these in depth. An animal is a dog if and only if it is a domesticated canine. And because the biconditional, as we said, is a two-way relationship, we can also say that an animal is a domesticated canine if and only if it is a dog. So that is a fairly clear example. The second one, a car is parked if and only if it is not moving. Here we need to be a little more careful, and it just shows one of the ways that logic is examined or analyzed. Let's reverse that. A car is not moving if and only if it is parked. Well, if we think about an example of a car on a ferry boat, if you're going to go across to an island with your car, you might drive it onto a ferry boat, park it, and then the ferry boat will move over the water. So in this case, your car is strictly moving, but it is also at the same time parked. So this would appear to be a counter-example to this biconditional that makes it actually not true, even though from a certain point of view it is. If we want to get really technical, we could say that wherever you park your car, it is going to be moving as the Earth spins and then rotates around the sun and then moves with the expanding universe. All of these things mean that your car is always moving, even if it is parked. So finding counter examples to given statements is one of the key ways to analyze a logical argument. So what is the difference between the conditional and the biconditional? They are clearly not the same, but how are they actually different? Well, we did define it earlier symbolically. Now let's put that into words. A biconditional is the conjunction of two conditionals where the antecedent and the consequent are reversed. So let's look at two conditionals here. If I am alive, then I am not dead, and if I am not dead, then I am alive. So these are clearly two conditionals in which the antecedent of one is the consequent of the other, and vice versa. So if we want to write that as a single biconditional statement, we would say, I am alive if and only if I am not dead. So we can see this and we can see it working in a way, but we can't really get an idea of the mechanics of how it works unless we look at the idea of necessary and sufficient conditions. So necessary and sufficient conditions are two different types of condition for something to be true. And how do we tell the difference? Well, let's think of an example. Jim is running in a race, and he wants to be on the winner's podium. And there it is, the winner's podium, where gold, silver, and bronze stand to receive their medals. Let's think about 3 different conditions. Jim finishes in first place, Jim finishes the race, and Jim finishes in the top 3. How are these conditions related to Jim getting onto that winner's podium? So if Jim finishes in first place, well, if he wins the race, he is certainly going to be on the podium. But he can still be on the podium if he doesn't win. He can come in second or third. Therefore, we can say finishing in first place is sufficient for Jim to be on the podium. It's good enough, but it is not necessary. He could be in second or third place and still be on the podium. Likewise, we could say that finishing in third place is a sufficient condition for Jim to be on the podium, but it's also not necessary. He could finish in second or first. Jim finishing the race, well, if he doesn't finish the race, he cannot be on the podium. However, if he does finish the race, he still might not be on the podium. He might finish in 4th or 5th or 6th place, etc. Therefore, finishing the race is a necessary condition for Jim to be on the podium, because he cannot be on the podium if it does not happen, but it is not sufficient. It is not only enough that he finishes the race, unless there are only 3 people in the race, but then the podium is kind of meaningless, of course. So let's think about our last condition. Jim finishes in the top 3. In this case, if Jim finishes in the top 3, then he will certainly be on the podium, and there is no way he can be on the podium if he does not finish in the top 3. Therefore, we can say finishing in the top 3 is both a necessary and a sufficient condition for Jim to be on the podium. So let's just look at necessary conditions and how we define them. Couple of definitional statements. A is a necessary condition for B if B cannot happen without A happening. And it's a necessary condition for B if the falsity of A guarantees the falsity of B. They're both really saying the same kind of thing, but the second example is perhaps clearer. If you're not sure that A is a necessary condition for B, then think, if A is false, does that guarantee that B is false? Does that make it certain that B is false? If it does, then that means that A is indeed a necessary condition for B. If you already know that A is necessary for B and you know that B is true, then you can entail that A must be true. So that's another way that you can use necessary conditions if you know them already. Couple of examples. Being nominated for an Oscar is a necessary condition for winning one, unsurprisingly. And also having run 26.2 miles is a necessary condition for completing a marathon. It's not sufficient because, arguably, you could run 26.2 miles around your house, and that wouldn't count as completing a marathon. You haven't actually signed up for a marathon and finished the race on race day. If you choose to believe that just running 26.2 miles anytime is a marathon, then you may disagree with that second example, but that's a different kind of situation. Thinking now about sufficient conditions, definitional statements might run like this. A is a sufficient condition for B if we know that A is true, then we know that B is true. To phrase this like we did in the previous slide, we would say the truth of A guarantees the truth of B. Now you might have to be careful here. In the previous slide, we said the falsity of A guarantees the falsity of B, and that is a necessary condition. Now this might, on the face of it, look like it's saying the same thing. The truth of A guarantees the truth of B, but this is not a two-way street. The truth of A guaranteeing the truth of B shows a sufficient condition. The falsity of A guaranteeing the falsity of B shows a necessary condition, but you cannot say that it shows the other way round. Some examples. Being a father is a sufficient condition for being male, at least traditionally. In this day and age, that is increasingly perhaps not the case, but in the broad sense you can see what I'm getting at. Being in the top 10 in the world is a sufficient condition for being a good golfer. And I have to be a little careful there. Probably I should say that being in the top 10 golf players in the world is a sufficient condition for being thought of as a good golfer. So to finish our discussion of these conditions, we have to look at three different forms of this connective. In logic, we use if to show the conditions, but we use it in three different ways. If, only if, and only if. So if demonstrates sufficiency, only if demonstrates necessity, and if and only if therefore demonstrates both. And that is written IFF in shorthand. That is not a typo. It is a shorthand way of writing if and only if. So, to return to our previous example, Jim will be on the podium if he finishes in first place. Jim can be on the podium only if he finishes the race. And I've changed the grammar there a little, but if we were to keep will, it would still have the same basic meaning. And finally, Jim will be on the podium if and only if he finishes in the top 3. So this is how we would demonstrate those three different situations grammatically.